All right, so today I am here to talk about some Web3 stuff. My name is Nader Dabit. I'm a software developer for about 10 years by trade. Now I'm working in developer relations, combining software development with speaking and writing and a bunch of other stuff. And today I'm going to be talking about the Web3 stack. So this is going to be focused mainly on the technology and not really like the ideology around Web3 that much. So when you hear the word Web3, it's only been really popularized, I would say, and thought about and talked about a lot in the mainstream the last couple of months, even maybe the last 6 months. So I'm going to be using the term like Web3 and Web2 a little bit, even though these terms weren't really in our vocabulary not even that long ago. But I think for us to compartmentalize some of the ideas, I need to kind of use some language. And when I say Web2, I'm kind of talking about like the current tech stack that we might have used using technologies like AWS or Vercel or more of these traditional technologies. And then Web3, I'm going to hopefully describe kind of like what that adds and brings to the table. So when someone asks me what Web3 means, you'll probably find a million different answers out there. But the thing that I'm interested in as a developer is kind of the tech stack. And I think that all of the ideas that have been enabled by Web3 are due to the technologies that have been brought to the table. So my definition is something like this: the stack of protocols that enable fully decentralized applications. And this was actually stolen from someone that I saw write this on Twitter. I typically would actually show the tweet of that, but I didn't actually do that this time. But if you search for this, you'll find it. So shout out to that person. So what is Web3 and what are these protocols? And before we talk about these new protocols, I think it's important to talk about some of the existing protocols that we kind of use every day. So I think one of the reasons that the internet has thrived and become so successful is because we have always been using these native internet protocols every day, whether or not we're kind of know we're using them or not. But to build out the applications, we've been using protocols like HTTP, FTP, TCP, SSH, either directly or indirectly through services. So if I build a site using HTTP, I can assume that people are going to be able to use it without any centralized intermediary. We can just assume that it's going to work. And one of the reasons that the internet, again, has been so successful, in my opinion, is because that we have these protocols that were widely adopted and they weren't subject to change. But we were slightly limited as compared to maybe what we wanted to do with these existing protocols. And the evolution of tech is always improving and creating new things. And I think that's kind of what Web3 has brought to the table, is new protocols. So what could we do before? Well, we can basically upload text files, attach them to to addresses, make them accessible. But there are certain pieces of functionality that were not kind of built into the internet. And we've kind of built out complex systems to address those issues. And a couple of those things that we were unable to do were to build internet native states into our protocols. Payments or digital scarcity, both of those things were kind of left out. So I think that the reason we're seeing a lot of the innovation today with these blockchain technologies is that we now have these additional protocols that we're able to build upon in addition to the ones that we had before. So we kind of have what we're building upon the existing things that we did have, and now we're adding new functionality. So now we can have distributed, decentralized, trustless ways to build out digital scarcity, native payments, transfer of value, even money. You could think of a state, and again, just kind of this idea of digital scarcity. So if I wanted to kind of transfer money in the past, how do we actually do that? If I wanted to send money from myself in the United States to someone in, for instance, Palestine, where some of my family is from, it was actually very, very, very complicated. Not only was it very complicated, but the underlying technology infrastructure was widely complicated. And not only that, but often we couldn't even send payments because we both had to have IDs. We both had to go to a bank account or go to a bank, open a bank account. We had to kind of bring documentation to them to allow them to do that. And over 1.7 billion people in the world are unbanked because they can't even do that. but that's kind of beyond this discussion. Anyway, there's like a bunch of complexity there. So like, I would say one of the really revolutionary things, obviously, that kind of brought a lot of the new innovation was the success of digital payments through, or the ability to kind of send value that in the future, I think will lead to scalable digital payments in the form of cryptocurrency. So what are some of the characteristics or repercussions? Well, I guess this is more like characteristics of Web3 when you build in this way. And you'll often hear the word decentralized used a lot because a lot of the priorities and a lot of the innovation, again, is kind of because of decentralization, not only of the web infrastructure, but of the data in the platform, as well as decentralizing the ownership of the data in the platform. So a lot of the business models you see in Web3 are not where you end up having VCs and the founders own as much, though you do see VC money coming in, and it's actually good to kind of help people get their ideas built and stuff. You just see more of a, and from at least my experience and opinion, decentralization and equitable share of this ownership. Native digital payments, self-sovereign identity, which is kind of a really big rabbit hole in and of itself that to me is probably one of my favorite things as a developer who's done a lot of really complex authentication and authorization. The idea to be able to control my identity and be able to just use public key cryptography and be able to kind of have single sign-on across the entire internet is very compelling to me. And I think that's going to be one of the things that makes Web3 go mainstream in the next 5 or so years. And as it relates to this talk, the idea of this this ability to build out distributed, trustless, and robust infrastructure paired with open and public backends, therefore leading developers and teams the opportunity, the ability to build out competing interfaces on existing backends. So what does that even mean? Well, I think a good example of how we as developers can leverage existing backends is when someone has built out a successful platform and they open up their API for us to use. So one example of that was Twitter. For a while, Twitter was building out or had people building out $1 million and multi-million-dollar and probably billion-dollar businesses on top of their APIs. Maybe some still do today, but over time, they would just change their API and literally shut down businesses. So like you could wake up one day and your application was essentially depending on the fact that they were going to keep this API running as it is today. So what if we had this ability to have immutable backends that no one could shut down? And that's kind of, and also composable. So like if I want to kind of use multiple backends to build out an interface, I can do that. So like those are some of the interesting things to me as a developer that we're starting to see happen in Web3. And I think that's ultimately going to be what maybe is continuing to drive this innovation that we've kind of seen happening lately. And I'll hopefully give a couple of examples of that in a moment. So what are the types of applications that people are building? We're still going to figure this out because we don't really know yet. We're only seeing maybe like a portion of what I think will probably end up happening down the road. But right now, obviously, DeFi, decentralized finance, and stable currencies are really compelling to me. Stable currencies are probably one of the most underrated things about all of this stuff. The ability to have stable currencies for most of us in places like the United States and Europe or whatever isn't that big a deal because like our euro and our US dollar and our pound is very, very stable. But in not most other parts of the world, but in many other parts of the world, this isn't the case. So for instance, in Lebanon, if you had $1 million in the bank, one day you actually woke up and you not only were unable to touch that money, other than maybe take $100 or a few $100s a month out, but that money started inflating over the course of a year around around 1,000%. So that $1 million a year later is worth $100,000 and you were unable to take it out. And obviously Venezuela is probably, the one that a lot of people are familiar with tens of thousands of percent of inflation, stuff like that. So having the ability to have accessible stable currencies is really interesting and compelling to me. Decentralized web infrastructure protocols is what we're going to be focusing on in just a moment. Gaming, instead of like spending thousands of dollars on Fortnite like I do with my kids, let's say we actually were able to maintain or hold some of that value if you choose to do that. I think that's pretty cool. And I think a lot of people around the world might think that's cool. And Axie Infinity is kind of like the first example of how this might work. I don't think it's kind of going to be around forever. I think it's more of like, oh, this worked, so now we kind of can apply that to a lot of other games. But they have done billions of dollars in transactions, and people are literally have and around the world quit their jobs to just play this full time. DAOs are really interesting to me. Decentralized autonomous organizations are enabled through different tokens and stuff like that. I have created developer DAO, so if you're interested in DAOs, you might take a look at that. We're about to open memberships back up, free sponsorships if you want to join. Digital art, this isn't something that is the most interesting to me, but it's picking up steam with different people that maybe wouldn't have dived into this technology in the past. So I think it's pretty cool. The tokenization of physical assets like real estate, we're starting to just see some of the applications of this. And then this idea of the Web3ification of Web2 applications. So music, like Audius, is a decentralized version of Spotify. Blogging, you have applications like Mir.xyz, which pay the writers and allow you to do fundraising directly through the platform. Social media, we haven't really seen that quite yet. I know a lot of people that are actually building this. So this is going to be an interesting area to watch. And what I would like to say, though, is like Web3 isn't the right term, in my opinion, for all this stuff. Because like when we think of releasing software, we think of versions. So I shipped version 1, and version 2 is a breaking change. So when we think of Web 2 and Web 3, to me, it almost sounds like, oh, this is going to replace like Web 2. When in reality, I think we're just given a new set of tools and a new paradigm of how we can build things, and we can still build all the things we have, and we will continue to do that. We now just have a new toolkit. We have a new skill set that we can learn, and we have a new paradigm of applications that we can build that we wouldn't have been able to build before these came along. And that's the way that I would approach this whole idea, so it doesn't feel like as threatening to the average developer, because I don't think it should be looked at in that way. So let's talk about building. When I kind of touched on some of those points, I mentioned distributed, trustless, and robust infrastructure. So what is this infrastructure? What are these tools? What does the stack look like? So one of the things that I've really enjoyed working with my team at Edge and Node is that we had a team of researchers that actually spent the last year focusing on understanding all of the different tools and protocols that are out there, and where they are today, and kind of like where they might be in the future. Because Web3 is a nascent technology, or is a nascent group of technologies, I would say. And we can't do everything that we want to do today. We're kind of getting there. We have really, really, I would say, advanced and solid production ready parts of this stack, but other parts are not quite there yet. So if I wanted to build something like Twitter with millions or billions of messages per minute, that high throughput probably wouldn't be the right place to build that today on Web3, because we just don't have everything that's there. But there are certain things you can kind of build today. So like what part of the research that we did was like, what are the pieces of the Web3 stack? What are the ones that you can use today? And what are the ones that we're kind of like still iterating on and kind of like getting to where we want to be? So this blog post is something I would check out in addition to this talk, if this is what interests you. And today we kind of released this diagram breaking apart some of these pieces, and I'm going to be touching on some of these pieces. And I'm also going to be talking about a blog post that I actually released today to go along with this talk. So when we think about building in Web 2, quote unquote, again, I'm just using that term because it's easy for me to compartmentalize the things that I was doing just a year ago. When I wanted to build an app working at AWS, I had been writing software for 9 years, and I can say, okay, I have this idea, and 99% of the time I could actually sit down there and bang out like a prototype. Now, this wouldn't be something, actually production ready or something really, really complex that I would say, okay, we're going to make money off of this, but I could kind of like build out pretty much anything I wanted at that point. I've been writing front-end code for 9 years. I've been writing back-end code for like 5 or 6 years. And what came to me was like, I had these core primitives that I could use to build out applications. So I needed some type of compute environment. I started leaning towards serverless compute working at AWS because it was super nice to be able to just not have to spin all this stuff up, but a serverless function or a server would be kind of like that compute environment that would also maybe serve as your API layer. Then you would have to have some identity or authentication layer in almost every application. And you needed to do some not only identity and authentication, but also authorization. And typically that was done at the compute layer as well. Then you needed somewhere to store this data. So you have a database, and then you need some type of file storage to scale out most applications. You typically aren't going to be storing binary for a video or an image directly in your database. Instead, you would reach for something like S3. And then we had where we would host our actual website. And this obviously could fall into that compute category, but I got to the point where I was just using things like Vercel or Amplify or whatever. So like using these 5 things, I was able to build out almost any application or at least get 95% of the way there. So when I joined Edge and Node and I was looking at Web3, I was like, okay, what does this tech stack look like? And in Web3, and it kind of looks very similarly. We have these new core primitives that are kind of enabled by smart contracts. And we're also seeing that there are protocols that are trying to rebuild a lot of the services that we use today using decentralized protocols that kind of bring to the table new functionality or more powerful use cases or different use cases, I would say. So we still have compute. We still have the need for some type of compute, right? Or some type of layer where we can do some type of content or data manipulation. We still need to deal with identity. We still need to store our data. We still need file storage and all of that stuff. We now just are focusing on how can we build out these, how can we kind of have these core pieces built and served from decentralized protocols, and how does smart contracts fit in? And that's kind of the core of this. So what are some of these tools? So I'm going to talk about some of the ones that I use. And this isn't like a comprehensive list. There are hundreds of different protocols that are out there and tools doing stuff, but these are the ones I think, again, are going to be that core set of tools that you can get the job done. So the graph is actually something you might have heard of if you followed me, because it's the protocol that I work the most closely with at Edge and Node. And the reason that it exists is that, like, when we query data from a database, databases are optimized for reading and writing data. So if I want to do like relational data, or I wanted to do some type of full text search or whatever, you often have these APIs built directly into the database. But with blockchain data, all of the evolution and all of the improvements are done in the right operations, because the main problem that people are trying to solve with blockchains are this idea of consensus, and how can you kind of have the consensus between these different nodes that are running in the network and have high throughput. It's a very complex computer science problem to solve. And the nature of a blockchain is that you have your data that's written in these, quote unquote, blocks over the course of time. So you might have a blockchain that's been running for 5 years, and you have data that's been stored over those 5 years. And you can't actually just hit the blockchain and do some type of query like you can on a database. You can't see, I want to get my friends, of this person, or I want to do some type of full text search, or I want to get a relational query. You can't really do that. So the graph is a decentralized protocol that allows you to define a smart contract, write a GraphQL schema, deploy it to the network, and it saves all this data and it serves it up in a GraphQL query. And it offers a way to do verifiable data, because if you decided to build out like what they call this as an indexer yourself, you would now have a centralized kind of a single point of failure. And that is kind of, I would say, breaking the whole idea around this whole decentralization in the first place. One of the things that, again, all this stuff brings to the table is no single point of failure. So yeah, this is a protocol I would check out. This is something that I've written about quite a bit. In addition to on-chain data, so the graph would be for like on-chain data. You would typically only write the most important things on-chain. So for a financial application, you would obviously use a blockchain for that. But let's say you wanted to build something like a very light messaging application, or you wanted to just have like maybe a chat window and a video stream or something like that, where the data is not as important and doesn't need to be stored, on-chain. Ceramic Network offers a what I would kind of consider a peer-to-peer database or an off-chain data protocol for storing data. And this offers the same characteristics that you would want out of a blockchain. The data is completely public and open, and anyone can build composable front ends on top of it, but you don't have to pay for a transaction fee. So the data storage is free. For live streaming, LivePeer is a really interesting protocol that allows you to build stuff that you might have used AWS for in the past. And it's at least 10 times cheaper, actually. And it essentially uses compute that is not being leveraged in people's networks. So like if I want to run a LivePeer node, the way that it works is really interesting. It basically will allow me to kind of use idle compute. And the way that they've done this, I don't know, it's a little too technical for me to kind of go into the details because I don't know them. But it is something that's really been, popular, and it's working really well, and it's inexpensive. And I've tried it, and it's actually easy to use. For file storage, the two main places I would probably use are either IPFS, which stands for Interplanetary File Storage, or RWeave. RWeave offers something that we've never really had before: permanent data storage. So you write data to this network, and your file is theoretically stored forever. So you pay a single transaction cost, and you never have to worry about your data actually going down. So this might be interesting is if you use something like S3 and you want to store an image. And I think a really good use case that people are using this is for NFTs, because NFT metadata is something that you're often paying money for. And for you to kind of think that, oh, this might go away one day, obviously wouldn't make a lot of sense. And it's one of the main valid criticisms that I've seen actually around NFTs and stuff. So RWeave offers this protocol for permanent file storage. So let's say I wanted to build an on-chain blog and I wanted to have a place to store my blog posts. I could do that in like an inexpensive network like Polygon, and then I could store my images in RWeave, and then I never have to pay anything ever again for my hosting. I just like write my post, and then I can have this backend that's literally available for the next 10 or 20 years. Anyone can build upon it. That's kind of the idea. For Git hosting, so Git is a decentralized protocol in and of itself, but most of us use a centralized version of that called GitHub or Bitbucket or something like that. Radical is a decentralized version of that. For identity, one of the words that we use that is how we deal with identity in Web3 is wallets. I don't like that name though, because we're so used to dealing with identity in the Web2 space with OAuth, or maybe username and password with an email or phone number or something like that, like we're used to kind of handing over our personal information for authentication purposes. And one of the great things about Web3 is that you can actually use just a public key and sign it with your wallet. But the word wallet is kind of not the best term in my opinion. And in my opinion, a good name for something like this might be like a Web3 identity app or a passport or something like that, because not only does it hold your identity, but it also kind of holds value. So if you have money or you have NFTs or something like that, it also allows you access rights into different DAOs and things like that. So the two main ones that I would check out are MetaMask and Rainbow, and those are the two that are kind of used the most. And then let's say that you did want to have a way to kind of have a public profile that you could store and use somewhere. So in today's world, we would sign up with something like OAuth with Google. They would take our information off of our Google profile and they would kind of use that. And each application would typically like store that in their own servers. And then, someone gets hacked and your information's like public or whatever. So I think one of the interesting protocols that is out there today and Web3 is Ceramic Network with self.id. They offer a way to do a kind of central place that you kind of store all of your information. When I say central, it's kind of like a single better description, because it's running on this decentralized network. But you store your information and you set up your profile as you would like. And then you enable access to point to that from other applications. So if I wanted to set a profile picture, or if I did want to set a username or something like that for an application, then I do it in this single place. And then every application that's using it would be able to just access that. And then the last thing would be a Web3 development environment. So for React, we have like these frameworks that do a lot more, like Next.js allows you to do cool stuff. That's kind of like the way I might describe something like a Web3 development environment. When you're building Web3 apps, you need a way to write a smart contract, compile the smart contract to something called ABIs, which are application binary interfaces, similar to how a GraphQL needs a query, a RPC endpoint needs some type of ABI to interact with the network. You need to be able to deploy that to the network. You need to be able to write tests, all kinds of stuff. So these are three great Web3 development environments: Foundry, Hardhat, and Truffle. And then I would also check out Anchor if you're writing for Solana. So like, how do we take all this stuff, put it together and build a dapp? And I'm almost done. I know we're kind of getting close on time. I would just say the main pieces would be, you would pick a client framework, a blockchain that you want to work with, a client library. So a client framework would be, you know, like something like Next.js. And then the client library will be how you interact with the network, and then your wallet. And this is kind of a really good basic start. And some of the blockchains that I would consider are Ethereum, Avalanche, Solana, Near, Phantom, and Polygon. I didn't mention that one here. But one of the interesting things about this space is coming here from JavaScript is that the same way that if you learn JavaScript or you learn React, you can learn once and build all these different things. So if you learn JavaScript, you can write server-side code, front-end code, all kinds of stuff. The blockchain space has something called the Ethereum virtual machine. Using the combination of Solidity and the EVM, you can actually write for dozens of blockchains. So it's kind of like this one skill set you can learn and be a blockchain developer across multiple networks. So for me, I like Next.js, I like Hardhat, I like Ethers.js, and I like use right now MetaMask and sometimes Rainbow. So that would be a good place to kind of get started. Scaffold ETH is a great repository to check out if you're looking to see a bunch of example code. I think there's over 200 full stack projects there that you can use. Anchor is something that I mentioned before, but this is a great place to get started if you want to build with Solana. And then today I launched a tutorial specifically today for AgentConf called The Complete Guide to Full Stack Web3 Development. Over 6,800 words. Took me like a couple of weeks to write this. And this is a good place to start if you want to learn how to do Web3 development. I would check it out. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for checking out my talk.
Awesome. Thank you, Nader. Let's do some chat claps for Nader. I love all of this. I already have questions. Make sure that you drop questions in the chat. Nader, you have been very active in educating folks about this Web3 thing. We still have like, I feel miles and miles to go with education. It's clearly got tons of like really tangible benefits as well as still downsides, which are all sort of like getting improved on. I know that folks on the internet take both sides really strongly, and it's been a sort of a point of contention. But I do think it's important to talk about the actual benefits. I know as in Latin America, it's been very popular because of the like bad governments reason and like inflation and stuff like that. So thank you for sharing. Let me start with a couple of questions, more like technical dapp questions before we get into anything too philosophical. Are there ways to build dapps in ways that don't tie you to say one blockchain? Like if you want change your mind, like maybe I'm like, oh, well, everyone's on Ethereum right now, so let me build it on Ethereum. But then maybe in a few weeks, everyone's on Solana, so let me swap. Will I have to rewrite it, or is it easy to sort of decouple that?
Yeah, so if you're writing on an EVM compatible network, which would be Polygon, Celo, Ethereum, Optimism, Arbitrum, there's like a bunch of those that are using the Ethereum virtual machine, which is basically the exact same, I would say, programming language, the same development library. Literally everything is the same. The only difference is kind of like your endpoint. So it would be almost like pointing from, you know, AWS to GCP or something. So like if you're doing that, then yes, all that code is transferable. But if you're doing something like Solana, which is a different development environment, a different language, then you would have to rewrite it.
Interesting. Cool. Thank you. Someone asked, where is the guide you created available? I assume on Twitter, but feel free to share it in the chat for folks. And the doc asks, what is your opinion on proof of work versus proof of stake, since a lot of chains consider proof of stake for scalability reasons?
Yeah, this is actually a really good question. One of the biggest problems with the evolution of how blockchains have kind of been built, the original distributed ledger was Bitcoin, which is a proof of work a consensus mechanism, meaning that like if you wanted to participate in the network and you wanted to mine coins, or if you're just sending a transaction, then you have a bunch of computers around the world just performing all these stupid calculations to solve some algorithm, and it's just very wasteful, and it's kind of like the environmental impact part that you hear a lot about blockchain stuff. So just like how, I mean, anything has evolved, like cars evolved from horses, and now we have like very environmentally friendly gasoline cars, and now we're moving to electric cars. I think that's kind of how most tech evolves, and blockchain tech is like not a whole lot different. I think what you're going to see, what you've already seen actually, is almost every single smart contract blockchain, actually every single smart contract blockchain is either already moved to something that is environmentally friendly, like proof of stake or proof of history, or they're in the process of moving. Ethereum is the most widely used smart contract network, and it still uses proof of work, but it has plans to move to proof of stake, which is going to kind of cut the environmental impact by like 0.39%. So that being said, you still have to acknowledge the fact that to get here, they had to kind of obviously spend a lot of energy. But if you kind of look at, in my opinion, the positive results of what this has already brought to many people in the world and where it's going, it's almost like, we could argue that cars and airplanes shouldn't exist or whatever, but they're just trade-offs and everything. And I think the only reason that I kind of joined this space was actually doing some research and realizing that, oh, everyone is moving to environmentally friendly consensus except for Bitcoin. And Bitcoin isn't really a Web3 technology. You can't build anything with it. I'm not even a fan of it. But realizing that there are a lot of passionate people in this space that actually care about that was actually really eye-opening for me. And a lot of people care about that stuff. And we're all essentially already using environmentally friendly consensus like Solana, Polygon, et cetera. Ethereum is the only one that isn't there yet, but they already have their code written, and they're hopefully merging it in the next couple of months, but they've been putting it off for a few months already. So I don't know when that's going to happen.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think everyone's sort of been anxiously awaiting that Ethereum update. This is a good question. Michael asked, is it possible to try out Web3 development while spending zero money?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if you take that tutorial I just shared, that's an easy way to do it. You can spin up a local test network and write code and deploy to it. You can actually get free tokens from the test networks that are live as well. So there's a bunch of live test networks, like Polygon has one, Ethereum has a handful of them, and you can participate in that way. One really great way to actually get paid to learn all this stuff is actually to do a grant. So I did a thread a few days ago that got like 5,000 likes. It did really well. Like it kind of outlined all these different grants programs. So there are grant programs within a single project that have over $1 billion to just literally give away to developers to build stuff or to write tutorials. So we at the Graph, for instance, we just did a $1.7 million round of grants for people that were doing stuff like tutorials and stuff. So I think a great way to get your foot in the door in Web3 is to check out that thread or just Google a protocol, the name Grant, because almost everyone has that. And they have in between a few million to tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars set aside to give to developers to either build documentation, to write open source code, to write tutorials or whatever. And not only are you kind of learning for free, but you're actually learning to get paid.
Cool. I'll do one more question and then we'll do the giveaway and then send you all home. There's a question in chat that this is inspired from, but there are Web3 apps or dapps or other things that aren't quite fully textbook decentralized. Like some people will use the OpenSea API, for example, when they want to pull off images of NFTs. And is that something we necessarily need to move away, or is that like an acceptable hybrid? And is the term decentralized a little bit perhaps a misnomer sometimes for that kind of stuff, where it's sort of both things?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what people are labeling as decentralized, it's typically like progressive decentralization. So if you look at Bitcoin and the people running the network with the nodes and stuff, it's kind of like this really small centralized percentage of people that have the most money that can actually participate the most in the network. Does that mean Bitcoin isn't decentralized? No, Bitcoin is definitely decentralized. Ethereum is the same way. You have, you know, more or less people running the different validators every day. Every network is kind of like on this, or every application I would say is on this, you know, I would say,
like a
position
scale
on this chart of like, yeah, progressively, like, are you more or less like one day you might be like doing this, and then you kind of like add a new protocol that takes away some centralization from your app. So like, I think ultimately the goal is to have more decentralization and therefore more stability. So the OpenSea is a great example. If you are accessing an NFT directly from the network, you know, the Ethereum network doesn't go down. But why does OpenSea go down? Well, the reason that OpenSea goes down is they're like creating a database in AWS, and they're going through every transaction in the Ethereum network and storing that data on their server, and then their server goes down. So you're not actually interacting with the network. But if you were interacting with the network, it wouldn't go down. And the Graph protocol is actually a great example of like what why it exists. Is like, we are there to offer decentralized APIs that don't go down as often. And you know, you can actually build out pretty much any API that you would need already. We have maybe some work to do, obviously, with a lot of these tooling and protocols to kind of get them to be as robust and as performant maybe as what we're used to in the Web2 space. But that's maybe the fun part of kind of being here. We're still figuring out a lot of this stuff, and I know people like, hey, it's early and all that stuff, and it's kind of annoying, but I do feel like it is kind of early and all this stuff.
Speaking of figuring this stuff out, shameless plug slightly, is that you mentioned that we weren't sure about the social media part of it yet. And Twitter has like spun off like an independent research thing called Blue Sky to figure out the future of decentralized social networks. And I think they're like really wanting input from like the community and stuff. So if anybody here is interested, like follow them, because sometimes they'll put out calls and they're sort of like trying to shape what maybe the future of social media decentralized would look like. Thank you so much, Nader, as always, for sharing. And thank you all for joining. Let's do a giveaway. I'm going to ask a question. Get your typing thingies ready. Whoever answers the fastest, and it has to be correct, obviously, not just whoever's the fastest, will get an amazing surprise AgentConf gift bag delivered to your house. Are we ready? Okay. Which model of computer is the single most sold ever? Ooh, ooh, keep trying, people, keep trying. Keep trying. According to the Guinness Book of World Records. Oh, and we have an answer. It is indeed the Commodore 64. We have one Commodore answer. I don't know if that counts. Tanya, does that count?
Well, I think it's.
Does it have to have the 64 in it? I'll let the bosses decide.
No, I've noticed it on my special booklet. That's perfect.
Are we going with Nino or Timo?
Timo.
Timo, you were the accurate responder. You are the winner. Congrats. Send a message to either the AgentConf Twitter or I guess privately in the chat with your contact details so you can receive your fabulous prize. And thank all of you for joining, and thank you to our organizers, and thank you to our wonderful sponsors who basically make this possible, because otherwise we'd all be broke and bored at home. So thank you, Volantic, and everybody else. Y'all are the best. Thank you for supporting education in tech as per usual. And have a wonderful rest of your week, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. Go play with Web3 and mono repos and open APIs /Swagger. I didn't know that name changed. And feel free to tweet at me whenever. Oh, look at all these little claps. Yay. Thank you. No, bye. Thank you. No, thank you. Oh, and thanks to our speakers, obviously, but that's sort of a given. I really enjoyed this. Oh, bye, Renee. Bye, Andreas. Bye, Jasmine. Bye, Felipe. Next year, skiing. Yeah, we'll tell that to the plague. It's not really up to us, is it? If everyone convinces one of your anti-vax friends to get vaccinated, maybe we'll be safer for next year ski trip, or at least snowboarding. Miro, is snowboarding the inferior one, do you think?
No, just people usually say skiing as default. There's a bunch of us that like to do both, so.
I'm a tropical child. I do exactly none, but what I am good at is spas, cafes, and drinking. So I will meet all of you at the après ski.
You were good at après ski last time.
Yeah, because I didn't wake up at 7 in the morning, so I wasn't tired. I had a leisurely like 10 a.m. wake up, a chill walk into town, a lot of coffee, and then everyone comes down by like 3 p.m. So it's not even that much time to kill. It's great. For me, it's a good deal. Right?
Yeah, and we have to increase.
Yes. Happy last meetup. Well done. This was really fun, despite not being there in person.
Thank you.
A little bit more slow paced, a little more relaxing.